Hi guys, today we're going to build a library booking mechanism or booking system. And many of you have voted on the survey that tutorials have been on the easy side, so we'll step it up a little bit and we'll introduce a few advanced things. This tutorial is probably not for the beginners, so if you're just started learning the language, you can probably skip this tutorial. It probably won't make much sense. But you're free to stay along for the ride, and you're actually very welcome. As for intermediate students and advanced programmers, we'll be working with database, and we'll be accessing it using JDBC, so it's going to be Apache and Darby database. What else? We're going to build a system. It's going to be a very simple system, but it's going to use quite a lot of design patterns and software development processes. We are also going to use data access objects, and so basically the whole interface of communicating with the database and how it is done. And finally, we'll add a JavaFX UI on top of that to display various operations that you can do with the database. At the end, the code will be uploaded to GitHub, and this is the repository for this tutorial, so library alone. All these links are going to be of help for this tutorial, and I will copy all of them and upload to the video description. And I also suspect this is going to be a long video tutorial, so I'll just start off and skip the basics. So the new Java project, library alone. Package. And the very first thing we're going to do is design our data structure, which is book. So the book is going to have unique ID, type long, a name, a list of authors, published year, and billion for available, which will track whether a book is available within the library or not. So these are basically, I've chosen various data types so you can see how they are handled with a database. Now we're going to generate getters and setters for all of them except for authors. Because authors is a type of list, and lists and databases do not work well together. So we're going to serialize it ourselves into a string. So get authors, return result for each author in authors list. Just add author and then some delimiter underscore possibly, and return the result. We need to remove that last delimiter though. Result length -1. And then set authors. Yeah, like I said, this tutorial is probably not for the beginners, so I'm not going to talk about each thing that I'm going to do. I expect you to sort of know the basics and stuff. Alright, so now we have our data structure. We also need to generate a string, which will include all of these. What else? Hash code and equals. We're not going to put available or unique ID because they don't contribute to the equality of a book. So same copies of the same book will have various different unique IDs, because unique ID is by definition unique, so the name sort of implies that. As for the equals, we're checking the name, author, and published year. If those three fields equal to each other, then it must be the same book, or at least in our case it will be the same book. Now we've finished with our data structure, and let's go to the data access object. It is essentially an interface, and this is its short and abbreviated name, DAO. It should be able to, well, essentially this is how you communicate with the database. It makes it easier and more domain specific. So first of all, we should be able to set up database, and possibly it throws an exception. Connect to database, and finally we must be able to close it, or close the connection. Now this is our generic DAO. Now we need to be able to make it a little bit more specific. So it's going to be called book DAO, which also extends DAO, and we're going to have a bit more specific stuff like insert book. So it takes in book data structure and gives back a unique ID that DBMS generated for us. It doesn't throw an exception, although it should, but I'm not going to focus that in the tutorial because the tutorial will get simply too long if we start working with exceptions as well. So public billion update book. So this is how you update rows in a database, and delete book. So this kind of corresponds to the normal insert, update, delete SQL stuff. We then should be able to find book by ID. Actually, I'm going to make it a little bit more generic. So we're going to return a list of books, find book by property. And this property could be one of those things. So these are going to be properties of our data structure. And we're going to define an enum, which is a search type. So book search type, which includes these things basically. So we can search by ID, we can search by name, author or authors, published year, and availability. So find book by property, it takes a search type enum, search type. And it also takes a generic object, which is the value we're going to search for. And I think this is enough. Well, we should also be able to provide sort of a generic find all. So it essentially selects everything from our table, from our database. Now we need to provide, so we're also going to throw in the MVC pattern because it's the easiest way to work with sort of business type applications, and we're going to have a class which is going to be our model, and we'll call it library because we are modeling the library. And the library will have methods like add new book, which takes name, possibly a list of authors, and published year. The availability automatically becomes true because we've just added it to the library. And the unique ID is generated by DBMS, so we don't need to worry about that. We can loan book, which takes a unique ID. So I'm thinking we're going to have a list view, and then the user will be able to select what book they want from the search, and then click on loan, which gets back the book, and then its unique ID and passes here. And return book. So this is where we are returning book to the back to the library. And I'm not actually deleting anything from the database, or will not be deleting, because of this flag. So it kind of allows to keep the record within the database and then simply flag the book, whether it's available or not. Because when you're loaning the book from the library, you're not actually removing it from the library. You're just borrowing it for a certain time period. So book, new book, set available automatically true, set name, set authors, and that's it. Unique ID is set automatically. Oh yeah, set year, set published year, and then we need to have access to book DAO, which we don't create, but we allow someone else to do that. So this is the basic principle of dependency injection. Book DAO, we need to find the book, book, search type, ID, the value is this, returns a list of books, although we know that's unique ID, so it should return ideally at least one, or at most one. If it returns 0, then this ID is non-existent. If book's length or size greater than 0, then books get 0. Set available to false. And update the record for the book. So it's the same book in that list. Pretty much the same, but the opposite. You simply set it to true, so it's now become available. These things ideally should throw exceptions, and we need to check for them. Also, we need to check whether it's available to loan before we actually do this kind of stuff. But for the sake of this tutorial, I'm going to omit them because it will just lengthen the video. This should give you a basic idea of how to proceed with communication. Right now, this is our model. What else do we need? These are only interfaces, so we actually need to implement them at some point. And now is the good time, I think. Darby book DAO. And because these are interfaces, you can implement a different type of concrete implementation, like file system book DAO, which uses some sort of serialization to the file system directly, like JSON, for example. Or you could have some cloud-based DAOs or databases, for example, Orchestrate, or you can even use Dropbox if you want to. Alright, so we need to implement all those methods now. You can do it directly using JDBC, built-in library, or you could use an external one, which I'm going to be using, which is called Apache Commons DB Utils, which essentially is like a collection of methods that will allow you to easily communicate with a database. So when you download this, all of these links will be up in the video description. So go to download, or so download, click on zip, then unzip it. You'll get something like that. You'll need to copy that jar, the plain jar. Create a folder called lib. Place it there. Right click on the library alone properties, build path, add jar, add dbutils. You also need to add external jar, which is the actual Darby database jar, which is located, what should be located under program files, Java, JDK 1.8, whatever version you have, db and lib. Select darby.jar, and these are the two libraries that we will need for today. So whenever there is an existing library that does something for you, which is not related to your application logic, so basically not domain specific, common boilerplate code like this, so setting up database and things like that, then you'd be better off using an actual existing library. There are two valid reasons that I can think of against using external libraries. If the library is too big and you'll spend more time learning it rather than implementing your own, or if the external library doesn't provide or doesn't satisfy all of your requirements. In those cases, you'll probably need to implement your own library. But in most cases, you should be able to use one of the external libraries available, and Apache Commons is a very nice place where you could obtain a few libraries that sort of complete the standard Java library. Alright, so we need a connection to the database. It is a Java SQL connection. We also need access to the database, so basically something that runs our queries and updates. So it's query runner db access. And this is the class that is from this dbutils library. So in the setup, we need to first create the connection. MVC, Darby, and the name of the database is going to be books.db. Also need to specify create flag. So this will create a physical sort of database. Then we can create our table within the database. And it will look something like that. Create table code books. And we'll pass in the our columns and their data types. These are the built-in data types available that you can use, and this is how you define an identity, which is going to be used as sort of unique key for our books. So whenever we insert a new book, the database will automatically generate a key, and we are going to call it, what do I call it? Unique ID of big and data type, which corresponds to Java long. So it starts with 1 and it will increment by 1. Now the rest of the fields, name, which is varchar, say 30. The value in the brackets is the length of the string, and varchar is the sort of SQL counterpart for string. Published year, which is integer. And finally, available is the boolean. That should create a table for us. And yeah, that's it for the setup. Connection, very similar. Except we don't specify the create flag. And close. Connection close. And shut down the database. When you shut down the database, it will throw an SQL exception, and this is a sort of documented behavior, so you don't need to worry about that. We catch the exception and we simply ignore it. We supply the shutdown true flag. Alright, now for insert, try db access. Connection, SQL statement is insert into table books, name, authors, published year, and available. Values, we need to supply for them. So these question marks will later get replaced by the actual values we supply here. New scalar, handler, big decimal, This is going to return the entered ID. Catch the exception, print stack trace. Although we shouldn't do that, but like I said, I'm not going to focus on that. Ideally, you should throw this exception upwards somewhere to the UI layer, or at least model layer, so you could handle it later and show it to the user saying something happened. We don't know what to do, or I don't know, depending on what kind of exception it is. And here we're going to pass this stuff. Book, get name, authors in this particular order. Return ID, or return -1 for error, or something like that. So yeah, these values from the actual book that we supply from the data structure, these will replace those question marks. And this is going to be the SQL query, or the insert statement. Update book, it's kind of similar. In fact, we'll need these everywhere, pretty much. Okay, update. Again, DB access. Connection. Update books, set name, authors, published year, and available. Where ID, or unique ID, matches given value, and we need to supply our parameters in this order. So basically it's the same order. We also need to supply unique ID. Delete book, DB access, update. So once we update it, return true. Although we're not going to check against those values anyway. They're there to sort of just to give you a concept of returning something from the query, so that the model or UI later know what to do. Update connection SQL delete from books, where ID unique ID equals the ID of the book. I think it's the right syntax. Delete from books where delete from table where something equals. I'll post all of these links in the video description, so you can go back and trace a few things, and if you've forgotten your SQL, then you can sort of have a look at these. This is the first place I go to when I forget a few things, like statements, access. So yeah, once we've deleted it, we return true. If any exception, return false. DB access query connection SQL is select everything from books, where, oh yeah, that's the generic method. Okay, so first of all we'll need to switch the thing. Search type. String where clause. And our value. Let's do the easiest ones. So available where clause is available equals question mark, and value stays the same. Value, yeah, let's name value close, whatever. It is the same for ID. Unique ID is valid as string. Name, name should be slightly different because it's a string and it contains something. So it's like this, and we'll also need to use the percentage sign to make sure that we capture the parts of the name. So this essentially allows us to do like string, whether a particular string contains that value, and that string is name. So where whether this name column in that row contains part of that string. Published year. Don't change anything. And authors like, and we'll do the same with authors. We don't really need to have default because it's an enum, but it's nice to have there anyway. So we can print something like unknown in case you've just added a new search type and you've forgotten to implement it. Unknown search type. What we can do now is where clause gets added here. The result set is the list. List handler being list handler, yeah. So this allows us to automatically parse the results into instances of this data structure, what is extremely useful. Parameters, and the parameters are value clause. So this essentially returns a list, so we can do just that. Here we can either return new array list, or we can just a sort of nice way of doing final list of book empty So instead of creating a new array list, a new object every time, we can just do this, which is created once, and pass it every time when we need to return empty list. So return that. If something happens, we return empty list. Find all return empty list here. Return DB access. Query connection SQL is going to be pretty much the same actually, except we don't have the value clause, so we don't have parameters. We just do this, select everything from books. That looks okay-ish. Alright, now let's get back to our UI part now. We've done the model and the database, so now it's back to model. Library loan app. It extends application. It has the public static void main where we launched it. Or actually, before we do that, we need to set up the our database and populate it with some test data. New Darby. Going to do that so that the exception is thrown back to here. Set up, we need our library, model, new library, and we'll do that later anyway, so I'll just do this now. This is sort of a very naive way of emulating or imitating build bug DAO, Spring's dependency injection. So essentially all of the important objects get initialized here, and this is the only place where you initialize them, which means that if anything needs changing, like the implementation, you implement it in a different way with different concrete implementation, and then you simply change that to something else, and you've altered pretty much the whole application by just changing one line of code, which is pretty cool. Library build. Actually, I'm going to call build model and call build DAO so it's more generic. Return new library that takes the build of DAO. So model, build model, model add new book. Which is test name 1, John Smith, Jack Smith, or actually it was the underscore, wasn't it? The delimiter. What else? Jane. Year 2010. Alright, we'll just do this and then use that for the actual application. So this will be our setting up code. So we'll just copy and paste this a few times. So this means we're just adding copies of the same book. And this is going to be a new book. Only these two guys. 2013. And this is going to be third book, or it's only Jane Smith, 2015. Let's call it name. Finally, book DAO close. And system exit, just in case, because we're extending application now. I think it will generate bootstrap. Right, let's test this. Well, the good thing it didn't throw an exception, so I'm assuming it worked. We now have books.db, which is the database that we defined. So this is the setup code, which we no longer need, hopefully. And now we're back to our UI, which is needed to be done as well, using FXML loader. So we're going full-blown software development, sort of MVC patterns and lots of different patterns that you may see in proper software development. Yeah, so get class, get resource, UI.fxml, stage set scene, new scene, loader load. So this will generate a UI for us. But we first need to create that new FXML document UI. Oh yeah, by the way, if you don't have the FXML plugin or FX Eclipse plugin, then just right click and new file, and then just type UI.fxml, and then just copy and paste those things. It will work the same way. But if you have FX Eclipse plugin, it's just easier because it gives you certain things like auto import. So we're going to have text field, which is the stuff where you search, choice box, to import that too. This choice box will determine the type of search that we're going to perform. List view to display the results. And the two buttons. Which are loan and return, which correspond to the library's two methods. We'll need FX ID of list view and this one, choice box. We also need to create a controller which would auto wire using FXML. We need to specify the full qualified class, library alone, controller. So this is FXML private choice box of book search type. The name of the field must match the name of FX ID. list view of books. Void initialize. If it has a method called initialize, it'll be called after construction, so we can take care of certain things like choice blocks, get items, set all book search type values, which is a great way of doing this because we obtain all of these values using search type, so it returns all of that, and it will place them into choice blocks. Choice blocks, get selection model. We need to select something by default, so we'll just select the first thing. What else? Well, the controller needs access to our model, which is the library. And again, going with the dependency injection principle or design pattern, we are not going to create model, but get it from here, private returns controller, build controller. We'll also need to take stage probably, new controller, build model. Loader, set controller factory. This is how we define how to create our controller when there is sort of very when your controller has at least one argument. So basically, if it doesn't have no arg constructor, then you need to do this so that it knows, FXML knows how to build your controller. We also need to at some point close the access to database. We'll do that through the model. So close, book close. Again, I'm not going to worry about exceptions. And when we construct the library, we connect to the database. This close needs to be called on stage close, so we'll probably need to pass stage here as well. Stage set on close request, model close. So we're passing the stage from here to there, and then it goes to controller. This way you can say when the application closes, close the connection to database. Initialize, the model gets set. So we need a few methods which correspond to the UI and the model. So on search, on loan, and finally on return. Which need to be set on here. On action on search. So this is the search text field. Button, text, loan, on action, on loan. So this will call this. On search, we take parameter from the text field action event. So these are the two valid signatures for a function to specify here. So those functions either take no parameters or take action event. So we need to typecast it to text field. get source. The source is going to be the node on which the action occurred, which is the text field. We import the text field and then we get text, which is going to be the text entered into the text field by the user. What else? Model. We also need to add a search method, which essentially just wraps around search. It takes books search type, and the value, which is really just a string value. Return book DAO, find books, find book by property, search type, value. This should have said find books rather than find book, because it returns a list. Choice box gets selected value, and parameter, which returns a list of books, which can be passed to our list view directly, because it's a list view of books. Set all, and just pass the result to there, which clears all the items it had and does this. On loan, model loan book, list view, get selected, get selection model, get selected item, get unique ID, that item. Although you should really check here if the user has selected anything, because if he didn't, then it will throw a null pointer exception. But I'm not going to check that. So this is pretty much it, I think, and hopefully this works. Where's our app? Let's give it a go. So we've already set up our database, which should contain those things. So I can now should be able to search with, let's try name first, test name 1. And when we hit enter, it returns all these things, which is correct because there are only 4 books, 4 copies of the same book. And these are straight from database books.db. Now we select one which has unique ID 3, loan it. It didn't update because we don't update, we don't have any listeners set up, so we need to do a search again, and it will return available false because we've just loaned it. We can now search for available and try false. It will return just one book. If we do true, it will return all other books and seems to be working. And there's only one missing, which is the ID 3, which we've just loaned. Now we can do author, Jane, let's do John. He appears to be in 2 types of books. Yeah, so it returns only 2 types of books, and it doesn't return the last one because the last one doesn't have him as the author. Finally, let's do published year 2015. Just returns all these things with 2015. So it seems to be working. Yeah, I think we can call it working. Now let's try availability false, and we are returning that book. Do false again, and it returns nothing, which means that it is now returned. So it's true. Yes, unique ID 3 is now returned back to the library, which is true. And when we hit that, it should close the connection to the database. So in this long video tutorial, we've pretty much covered a lot of software development things as well, along with how to access a database and work with a database, to create a data access object and various interfaces to make it easier to refactor your code or change to a different database if you wanted to. for example, cloud-based or file system-based databases. The only thing we probably didn't cover, that I deliberately omitted, was the exception handling. So, which isn't really that difficult, so just throw the exception upwards to the model and possibly to the UI layer, where you handle it by displaying a dialog possibly. Alright, thank you for staying with me for this tutorial, and you're free to leave your comments or take a short 3-question survey so I can improve the content. And thank you for subscribing and listening to this video tutorial.